everyone. Welcome to LTV Talks. Today, we are going to dive deep into the world of CRM, data, and everything in between. And I'm thrilled to have Dr. Tim Wiegels on the show. Tim is a seasoned data leader with a wealth of experience across industries from mobility to gaming to health and video streaming. He's led large-scale data teams, most notably as Vice President of Data at FreeNow, where he spearheaded the company's data strategy, implemented a data mesh approach, which is super interesting, and played a key role in shaping the mobility data sharing efforts also across Europe, right? And now, as the founder and CEO of Tim Wiegel's Data Solutions, he helps businesses navigate the complexities of data leadership and strategy. As he puts it really well, he conducts data therapy sessions for product marketing and data teams across organizations. And in today's episode, we'll be actually exploring a topic that is super crucial for CRM teams, I feel, which is, how you measure effectively your impact. You avoid common pitfalls that CRM teams often go into and build a data-driven retention strategy that actually works. But Tim, with that, welcome to the show, man. I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, hi Karan. Thanks for having me. Very excited as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I found you while actually, on my journey from a personal question, which was how do I define ROI on CRM tools investment? And then we had a great chat and you had a lot to add. But before all of that, I would love for you to tell me how you got where you are because I saw that you do a master's and PhD in bioinformatics, was it?
Yeah, yeah,
And how
yeah.
how does someone like that go into marketing and data all of a
Oh,
sudden?
that's actually, for me, it was easy or straightforward, but it's probably not. Hi, I'm Tim. I've been doing something with data for, I think, almost 20 years now, depending how much of the PhD and stuff you count. And yeah, I started actually out as a diploma student. That was before master started, so I'm that old in Germany and in bioinformatics. I think nowadays you would probably call bioinformatics more something like data science, human computer interaction, machine learning, blah, blah, blah. But that was all before that. So I think that was actually in the noughties, and data scientist was not a buzzword yet. And I decided to do a PhD, to be honest, because the project sounded interesting, the money was nice, and I was like, hey, having a doctor in front of your name in Germany can't be that bad. It's not. It's not. But to be honest, you lose like 4 or 5 years, which I also felt. Yeah, did the PhD, did a lot of stuff. Funnily, didn't do the PhD at a university, but immediately started in this kind of European tax money funded institute, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. And my job was pretty quickly to sell the software project we were building all around the world and also understand what the customers wanted, define the roadmap and stuff like this. I think I became a product manager and software developer quite quickly. That was nice, but at some point I realized science and me, this is interesting, but doesn't really fit. It's too slow. There's too much politics. I hate politics, really, with all my heart. Politics and companies are the worst, and decided to get out, which only took me 2 years because, as you might know, when you have a PhD, you don't know shit. You know something about a very, very specific thing quite well. I mean, afterwards, you realize you know a lot of concepts quite well. You know quite well how to define stuff, how to understand stuff quickly. But that doesn't help you with questions in job interviews like, do you know what an A B test is? Fuck no, I have no idea. I didn't know. Then I went home and checked and was like, oh, it's a Wilkin-Cox square test. Yeah, obviously I know this. I've done this thousands of times. Yeah, so it took me 2 years to get out. And then I think it was a little bit like in German, there's like the saying, the mother comes to the child or whatever. It doesn't matter. It was like, it must have been fate because I had like 20 job interviews. There was one at Good Game Studios, big German gaming company, which had aspirations to become very, very big, is now very steady. Well, not every startup goes directly the way you expect it to. And we also had one of these talks where I was like, yeah, it doesn't fit right now. I think you need to read 1 or 2 books about how business works. Did that, had another interview 10 minutes in, and started out as a data scientist. And yes, I think by heart, I'm still something like a data scientist, analyst, data engineer, whatever you want to call all these things. But it became apparent quite quickly that my real skill is to understand what the management side wants, what the marketing side wants, what the product side wants, and translate this to what the data people understand. And so I think after 2 weeks, there was this very interesting discussion at Good Game Studios where I was like, yeah, you can code quite well. That's something you can do good, but people enjoy that more, and people can also do that better. Go to talk to the management and make them understand how we should do TV tracking and how we should understand the TV ads. Yeah, and that's pretty much the story of my life. I think I did most possible jobs you could do at Good Game Studios. I was the product manager for marketing intelligence. I led changing the marketing data infrastructure from a Synology file server on a SQL database to something real. And in the end, I had a team which was called business intelligence controlling, which I think nowadays you would call something like data product management, data governance, track. I have no idea. We pretty much made sure that stuff comes in at the front, and when it comes out at the back, the data is still the same. That was the main thing. Then I was yeah, I mean, the thing is also there I did a lot of marketing stuff, right? I immediately slipped into how can you actually assign return on invest and users to TV slides, which, as you might know, is a very interesting thing to do because obviously TV isn't trackable. So there was a lot of stuff like incrementality and multi-touch attribution and understanding where users come from, defining which channels might be useful and really might be influenced by TV. So I very quickly slipped into this, which is funny because I know a lot of people that come from a similar background. So academia, a little bit more technical, and a lot of them went into the marketing direction, which I think from the one hand is because it was the only thing where you got big data quite quickly. Back then, when we did hyper targeting, all the views, all the clicks, that was quite nice. But it's also a very academic field for people who don't like academics, because there's a lot of stuff like incrementality and marketing mix modeling. So you really have to understand how do you model things, how do you really get stuff in. So I think it was a given that this is the area that interests me. And also on the other hand, my wife is doing performance marketing, so maybe that also
It
somehow
helps.
played into this, right? And always interested in tracking. Then I was at Xing, where I did also B2B marketing and analytics. Resigned in the probation period because I hated the leadership so much.
I see.
And then I was in an incubator, which I think also set the stage for everything I did after FreeNow, because I got in there as the head of BI and data. Yeah, as a one-man show. So it was pretty much, hey,
Wow.
this is your team now. So this is your desk pretty much. And we have 5 companies and we need tracking, we need marketing dashboards, we need to understand how to send email to people. Go. And yeah, I did that. And that was actually quite fun. Did this for a year. Of these 5 companies, I think 3 still exist, which is not that bad. And then I went to my taxi because being from Hamburg was always like, there's a few companies in Hamburg that are really interesting, nice startups, interesting startups. I already did Good Game Studios in Xing, so I did the gaming and I did the social stuff in Hamburg, so I obviously had to do mobility. And it was also very interesting because when I moved into my taxi, which is very interesting for everyone who's doing CRM, that was in 2018, and you guys might all remember that there were vouchers everywhere. So every taxi ride you could do with a voucher. Yeah, I started together with the current CEO, who was also my boss in 2 former companies. And our first task we gave ourselves was like, we kill this voucher bullshit because this is completely not profitable. It doesn't make any sense. There's no segmentation. No one thinks about who to send these vouchers. So I think all of my friends hate me a bit for that because very quickly in 2019, 2020, the amount of vouchers they got decreased a lot. Yeah, but FreeNow is now profitable, so maybe that was the right way to do it. Yeah, and I mean, I did everything there. Data team started out at 16 people. I think the first at about 100, then we went down to 60 because of COVID and lost fundings and stuff like this. Then we went up again to, I think, 80, 90, then it went down a bit again. And I think when I left, it was more than 120. So yeah, that was quite big. And also building up the whole marketing data infrastructure, utilizing Braze properly for stuff that might be interesting to you guys, and also really putting a lid on how should different teams in different steps of the funnel look at their data. And I have very many interesting anecdotes about this. Yeah, and then in the end, I did very altruistic things because I realized, well, this is nice. I now made a data mesh. So that means instead of 120 direct reports, I have like 30, which is okay. But I need to do something else. I mean, I think that's also something when you look at people that rise up in the ranks of data and tech. not many of these people are people managers. I think almost none are really enjoying people management. That's the same for me. I love mentoring. I love coaching. I love leading people. I absolutely hate one-on-ones, performance stuff, all this shit. It's like, yeah, I have to do this, but that's not something, it doesn't give me joy. Let's just put it like this.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, we have to do another layoff round. So the first one who goes is in the data team is me, because that's saving 3 to 4 positions and I want to do something else. Yeah. And then I looked a
Interesting.
little bit around and was like, I want to do more of the marketing stuff. I already had this podcast with the people from Atriba, now Funnel. I looked at a few jobs, but there was, as you say in German, the same shit in green, which is funny because one of my first job offers was Bold, which is literally the same shit in green when you look from FreeNow. And yeah, I decided, nah, that's not for me. I have to be somewhere at the top, CDO, something like this, but no steering from 10 people who don't know shit about my work. And then suddenly people started asking me about, hey, you are free now. Can you do this and this and this and this for us? And like, yeah, sure. And that's not a German joke because the whole job hat sich verselbstständigt. In German, selbstständig is freelancing, and that means like I freelanced myself somehow. It doesn't really fit in English. And this is something I do now for the last, more than 2 years already. And to be honest, I don't think I will ever go back.
Wow, lovely. And we share at least that part of the journey, right? Like I moved to freelancing 3 years ago, and I think similar feelings. Like I did a few full-time gigs, and I also felt like people management takes so much of your time and energy that it's always better to have like projects, focused projects where you can be, you can actually be valuable enough,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I mean, you also go into this very weird imbalance because you can be much more effective when you go into this team, talk to them for 1 hour, understand what their issues are, but you actually have to do 10 performance reviews. And
Right.
then it's like, what's actually more important for the company? Or where can I be of more benefit? And I think for me, that's quite clear. I might hire people at some point, but yeah, I'm trying to push this away as much as possible.
I get you. And what I find interesting is like you've led massive data teams and across your career, right? And you faced, as you sort of pointed to there, right? Like there are definitely like a lot of key challenges that teams have, and especially with data, how businesses look at data at different parts of the funnel. What are some of the challenges that you found, you know, keep reoccurring, and maybe keep the focus, so that otherwise it will take you an hour probably to get through all, but like maybe in the context of CRM or
Yeah.
marketing,
No,
what are the
really.
things that people usually get wrong or reoccurring issue?
I mean, really easy. I think the biggest issue is, and I've seen this in like at Good Game Studios and at FreeNow, but at FreeNow I have a very good example. Teams tend to focus on their part of the funnel too much. So I think that's one big issue, right? You might have an acquisition team that really looks at their own channel, might be SEA, might be media, might be something else. You might have, well, I mean, at FreeNow we had several CRM teams, obviously. So several
Hmm.
teams did something to improve conversion rates from step A to step B in the funnel that had like 10 steps. And the biggest issue I've seen quite often already, and that's why I always push like, yes, focus on your KPIs, but you have to look at the North Stars and the big picture, is that people really look at only their piece of the funnel. And I mean, the best example is something that happened at FreeNow. Yeah, I mean, it's also like you also get weird people in at some point that also focus on this like out of vain. I have no idea. But this team had the task to increase the conversion rate from the point where you put in your destination and click on, yes, I want to buy it for this price. So you all know the screen, right? It's like it shows you taxi one is like this price, right? It's this
Hmm.
price and so on. And what this team did to increase their conversion rate was to implement a voucher, an auto injected voucher, which obviously meant that great, every customer who's important is getting money off and
Hmm.
will for sure click on this button. Yeah. But the problem was that in the end, obviously, we lost money like shit because no one looked at the revenue. So I think that this is really the biggest thing, that they have a task and they might solve this task really well. I mean, this voucher was great, right? I mean, for this, increasing this KPI, perfect. Nothing better to do. But I mean, this is exactly where they should at first look at the big picture and also use all the let's call it CRM power they had properly, right? Because, I mean, we know or we knew about these customers a lot. So we knew quite well who would have taken the ride anyways, who is someone who's just in for the first time in the app or hasn't been around for like half a year. Also difficult because they might also take the ride because they want to go to the airport. But I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, you could have used segmentation quite well for this and really apply this voucher only to people that would have really benefited from it. And at the same time, we would also have benefited because they wouldn't have taken the tour otherwise.
And basically, what you're saying is like you kind of have to factor in the probability that someone was not going to take a ride
Yeah,
without a voucher, right? And then push those people. But for people who are already likely to take a ride, you want to
yeah,
not give them
yeah,
a
yeah.
big voucher,
And
right?
I mean, just out of historical data and everything we know, we could have pretty much said afterwards, yeah, 80% of these people would have taken the ride anyway. So for 80% of these people, we lost €2 for each of them.
Mm,
And the
I
problem is
see.
also, I mean, if you look at a taxi ride, obviously the revenue FreeNow makes of a taxi ride is not that much more like €2 or €3, right? It's not like the €20 you pay for the taxi ride, obviously. And that was also one of the reasons why we tried to get as much as yeah as much intelligence into like giving vouchers out to people as possible, because this is really the thing. Every voucher is in the end either you get someone into the system that wouldn't have been in there, or you lose money, and you really have to find out how to balance this out in the right direction and not in the wrong direction.
And actually, that's perfect, right? Because I think like the first big sort of pillar, right, or the common struggle, if you look at CRM teams, is this whole question about, what is measured and what you're improving versus what actually matters, right? And in your example, that sits perfectly well because what's measured and what was given as the KPI to optimize was this conversion rate, whereas what actually matters is also the net revenue or the profitability of the company on each ride, right? In your opinion, why do teams make that mistake? Like, is it a lack of context from the senior teams coming down, where we say, okay, we don't know how much profitable we are on each ride, so let just improve your part of the funnel and we hope that business will do better, right? Is that the issue? How do teams usually get into these kind of
I
place?
think it's a mixture of a few things. I think what you said is very apparent in companies that get big quickly. And I mean, that's something we see all around in every startup, right? It's like, I mean, I started Good Game Studios in May with 300 people. Next year, we're 1,500. And something very similar happened at FreeNow as well. And I think this very, very quick, very strong increase always leads to that you hire a lot of people very quickly, and most of these people are quite new in their job. It might be one issue, right? And then it's really, there is this issue because from the top you get like, oh, you have to increase this conversion rate, and then this is focus. And I mean, we all know this, right? Everyone is overworked in startups, everyone is doing more than one job. So I think it's a mixture out of not enough context, not enough information, and too much work and too much focus on, I have to get this thing done. Not enough headspace. I think that's what we always said. It's not enough headspace to really think one step ahead of your job, which I think you always have to do in things that involve numbers or involve predicting how people behave and so on. You can't just do it straight. It doesn't work. And if you don't have the headspace for that, I think that always leads to that. And the funny thing is also, on the other hand, I've never seen this kind of issues in smaller companies. So especially if you have like one or two people in the marketing team, they usually have a much better grasp about, okay, it's generally it's also smaller, sure. So it's not much more, but it's still, you have a grasp about what you do and you also understand what the rest of the company does. And I mean, it's also easier because quite often then you're part of the management team and you see anyways what happens. And I mean, what I try to explain people is like, when they ask, why do I need to care about the big picture? Well, the big picture is what pays your salary, right? And that's not just to know whether the company is failing and you have to run away, but that's it as well, right? I mean, it's quite good to actually look at these numbers because also for yourself, you should be prepared when something's coming. I mean, I always knew when layoff waves were coming in any company, many of my team members were completely dumbfounded. And when I was like, yeah, but look at this line goes down. And this line going down doesn't mean we can pay everyone anymore. So I think these are things that, yeah, people should be aware of, but still you have to be able to make the time at your job for that.
100%. I remember reading, like, I did my master's here in Berlin, and during the when I had my first job, I remember reading Amazon's principles or values, right? And
Yeah.
they have this very famous 16, I think, values or something. And I always remember this one value, which was think like you are the business owner, right? And I feel like that has helped me throughout my career as well. Like even in teams, if you think, are you if it was your business, what would you be careful about, right? And that goes from booking your travel trips or your business trips and using the cheapest flights or
Yeah.
thinking about every decision that you make, even in your role, right?
But it's also that there's a German saying about this. When you work somewhere, always treat it as if it was your own money.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
mean,
and
yeah,
that's
I
the
mean,
best philosophy.
us being freelancers, I must also say I don't take the cheapest trip with the train. I take the one where I can work with. That's of course that makes me more money in the end, right?
Positive ROI,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
all
yeah,
it's
yeah,
all
yeah.
about, right? And so if we and I think this is also out in the open, right? Like most teams and most companies, somewhere deep down they know that they have these issues, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And if we bring it to like also CRM teams that I work with, it's so common for me to work with even the heads of CRMs, and then sometimes they don't know if they have a very positive business impact, or they're what's sort of driving the business impact from their team. So what is your like maybe free thoughts, right, on if I give you a question on like how do CRM teams build a measurement model that aligns with like sort of overall business goals, right? Like how do teams move from just looking at opens, clicks, or maybe even conversion rate, which arguably you would think that is great thing for the company. How do you move from that to understanding your business goals, right? Like how would you work with a team like that and help them get there?
I mean, in the end, the first important thing is really to understand why do we do CRM in that company, right? I mean, there's a lot of things where it's actually more focused on growth, and then there might not be something where you can really put a number of that, or just not being important. I think the important question is really, what is our goal with CRM? And I mean, one of the obvious things is you want to keep people in the system, right? You want to retain customers. That's one thing. I mean, for me, the easiest KPI to really understand whether our CRM measures or retention measures work is the ratio between existing users and new users. That will be something. You can't put a number on that, or you can't put a fiscal number or monetary value on this, but this is really something where you can say, this works. And I mean, obviously, it's a ratio, so always look at the full numbers as well, because you might have a ratio of 100% because two people come back, one people comes in. So that might not be great
Right.
either. The other thing is really stuff like at FreeNow was quite easy, right? Because we had a monetary value on these vouchers. And that was quite easy because we could really see when we spend to retain a customer, when we spend €5, how often does this customer come back in the next 1 week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks? How much money do we make with that? So in the end, you can also, when you have these kind of measures, which are quite easy, and I think you can do this in any business where you use voucher codes to get people back into the system, you can actually set this as a new acquisition point in time and then see, oh, how much do we actually make money wise? What I also tried, which is a bit more difficult, is really to get this, this nice cohort views, right? Where you can really see, oh, we spend this much money in acquisition. This is the amount of running revenue we get out of the customer. You don't have to put the cost only in the month zero, right? You can also put cost for every CRM treatment you do into that as well. And then you also have an overview of that, which makes it more difficult, which is, I think, quite hard for some people to look at. But in the end, this is like the best and realest number, right? Because it really shows you this is all our marketing costs, and this is really what we get out of the customer.
Hmm.
That might
100%.
become. I mean, in the end, and also, even though I said in the beginning, this is a very shitty way to look at it. You also have to look at this conversion rate thing, right? You really have to look at. I want to improve this tiny step with my CRM measures. Do my CRM measures have an effect? And I mean, sure, the CRM measures could be shit in the end, but still, this is something how you can understand whether what you're doing right now has a direct impact. So it's like I always try to make people understand you have to do North Star KPIs on the top, but you also can do North Star KPIs for every team, right? Because in the end, this KPI tree goes down a lot, and you can actually take your branch and really look
Hmm.
at this and try to improve this area as much as possible while still
Yeah.
looking at the top.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like if I also reframe it, like I feel like you're saying two things, which is one is okay, first you need to understand or have a very good understanding of how your company grows or makes money. and how do you fit in that picture, right? And sometimes it's about vouchers, sometimes it's about those reactivations that you see were not going to come anyway, and with vouchers you are able to get some money out of this, so it's about that increasing that LTV. But also one framework that I always love to use when I'm doing these measurement sort of projects, right, I think is nature versus nurture measurement, right?
Yeah,
And then what
yeah.
you want to measure is like, okay, my nature curve, if users were left alone without any nudges, anything, that's how they would perform, and that's how much revenue they give me. And where are those parts where I can sort of nurture them and add tweaks where I can increase the value that comes out of them, right?
That's nice because you're pretty much going into incrementality and uplift modeling with that already, right? That's yeah. I mean that is like the master class, but
I
not
see,
everyone
I
not
see.
everyone understands this.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I also really like your idea about, and I'll tell you a little bit about like how most CRM teams do it, right? And I'm sure you've seen many more of them. But like what I have seen is usually you have like these global control groups, which of course have no CRM treatment or maybe like very minimal transactional and stuff like that. And then everything you send is compared against it, and then you see how well you do. But what you said there is also very interesting, because most teams, they switch on a control group and then they just use that forever, right? And what you are saying is no, you should actually mark the beginning of time whenever you want to measure a project,
Yeah,
and then use that as almost like a new acquisition, and then see how much value drove from that point onward.
exactly. And I mean, you also have to do this because you have to get, how do you call it, a fresh model, right? It's completely comparable to the stuff we did with TV tracking, because what we did there was keep marketing steady for 6 weeks, take this, model the curve out of that, and then use this model to understand, oh, this would have been the level when we wouldn't have made TV, and then actually make the difference and put this on the TV tracking. But the issue is really, if you look at Good Game Studios in Germany, like 10 years ago, there was an ad on TV every 5 minutes, and that was for 2 years straight. So, for example, the German model wasn't changed for 2 years, and we still took the baseline from 2 years ago. So, I think this is the thing, right? If you do baselining, this baselining has to be as fresh as possible. Otherwise, you are just losing information, and in the end, you are blind.
Okay, yeah. That reminds me to ask you two stupid questions that I have never been able to get answers to. Every time I speak to different companies, the answers varies on like different, even experienced data folks have very different answers, and maybe you can tell me why and like explain the reasoning behind it. But one thing is refreshing global control groups, right? So one of my hypotheses that I have been very amused why this doesn't happen very often is that, especially again, I'm speaking with a very CRM heavy context, but what we do usually is we separate out this global control group, right? And then imagine they receive no comms, and these you have the test group which is receiving comms. 1 month later, let's say you drove some impact over the control group, which is great, that's what you want to see. But my argument is that 1 month later, the people that you have in the control group are really, really motivated people who love your app and who love using your service. And because they have received no nurture campaigns, they still decided to stick with your app and still use your service. Versus in the test group, they have been heavily influenced by CRM, right? And so I always make this argument that you need to reset your control groups
Yeah, yeah.
after that point as well, right? And that's the best practice, or should it be followed, or when should it not be followed?
To be honest, I think people do this way too little, right? And I mean, the thing is also exactly what you said. If you have a control group, it will also decrease, right? I mean, in the beginning, you like split, let's say you have 2,000 customers, you split them 1,000 get treated, 1,000 don't get treated. I will bet you that after 2 or 3 months, the 1,000 that don't get treated are not 1,000 anymore that come back into the app, right? I think that's one big thing, right? You are starting to compare peers to apples. These will be the people that will be left will be your people that are interested in the app. And I mean, you also have to get the others back at some point, right? I think it's also one thing. If you haven't treated someone for like 2 or 3 months, maybe change this because you are losing money. But
Mm.
I think quite often, what's the English word? In German, it's Scheuklappen. I think there's a bit of tunnel vision, right? Because this is how you do it. This is how it works. And again, you don't have the headspace to think a step further ahead and why you should change it.
Right. And you just go ahead with like whatever the tool
Exactly.
has sort of told you, right? And And that brings me to like, one of the other sort of big questions, right? Which is like this whole topic around tooling overload
Yeah.
and sort of misalignment, right? And I think CRM teams, and if you take the usual suspects like Braze or a Salesforce, people invest very heavily into these platforms, right?
Yeah.
Why are CRM teams relying too much on these rules? Why might it be a bad thing? And you know, what's your impression been like? Is it just my impression, or I know
No,
you share this feeling as well, but what has been your
no.
experience?
I would really say it doesn't matter which kind of tool you use. It will be way too much for the stuff you really need, and you will never be able to operationalize it fully. And I think even operationalizing it in the way you need takes half a year or a year or something like this.
Mm,
I think tools like Braze, Salesforce, whatever you want to go, HubSpot, Pipedrive are all great. But the issue is really something like Braze and Salesforce is massive, right? There's so much stuff in there. Quite often the issue is that you need something where you can segment data. And to be honest, segmenting data, if you'd like say it like this, that might also just work in a database or on an Excel sheet if you go in a really, really weird direction. But I think that quite often works, right? I think people are quite often missing out the step where they don't get a tool immediately, but they try to build it with their own, with their own hands, with their own database. If you want to send out mails via MailChimp, you have to build a table which has some kind of weird calculation to say this person gets it, this person gets it, this person gets it, and then you export a CSV to MailChimp. Done. That's it. I mean, that also works, and it's also quite easy to get the feedback in. I think a lot of companies have these tools already, and this is something people learn. I mean, obviously, if Braze is set up perfectly, this is beautiful. It makes stuff a lot easier. Again, also nice anecdote, but then you still might have people that start something in Braze, don't have a dashboard that shows them what happens in Braze, and lose money because they don't look at the Braze analytics data. So I think it's always like people are too dependent on this. I think this is pretty much how we can sum it up, right? People are too dependent on the tools. There might
mm,
not be enough people on the data side to work with them on that because, I mean, we also said this before. I always think it doesn't matter where you work in marketing, whether it's digital marketing, whether it's acquisition, whether it's retention, whether it's CRM, even whether it's brand, you have to work closely with the data side. And then it will only work. And I think also both sides have to have a common understanding of what needs to be done. And then in the end, a tool is just a tool. But I mean, if you look at stuff like Braze or Salesforce, if you just have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I think that's
mm,
the big issue. And I had examples where people have Salesforce running for 3 years, and at some point tell me we also have to now get the segments into the CDP. I was like, what CDP? Yeah, we have a CDP. We bought this 3 years ago. And you never used it. How much do you pay for the CDP every year? And I think this is like the common thing, right? It's like the tool companies are quite good in telling you, if you buy our tool, we will solve everything.
mm,
In some cases, that might even be true, but they leave out the dimension of time and when they solve everything and how much effort that is. And I think
mm,
that's really that's the issue. So I would always say if you start with CRM, don't get a massive tool immediately. Get something that solves your use case. And if you want something where you can put your contacts in and so on, then get a small version of, I'm not sure, Pipedrive or HubSpot. Don't get the full-fledged thing like Salesforce where you have a marketing cloud, where you have a sales cloud, where you have everything in there, and a CDP, and then you just use the tiny part where you put contact names into your sales cloud.
yeah. Like, don't use Braze as a MailChimp, right? Like, make sure that you know what
Yeah.
that tool gives you, and then you are ready to use it, right? And I think that's also like a big theme. Like, you start having a tool, and I think like sometimes it's even a benefit to have a tool that you can't afford yet, and so you have to make do with like smaller tools that don't enable everything in the world, but then that forces you to sort of define your strategy,
Yeah.
and that says, oh, actually, what do I want out of this, right? And then you move on to Braze or something a bit that suits your need, and then you are in a better
Yeah,
place.
because also there's quite often the common misconception that if you get something like Braze, you just dump all your unstructured data in there and it works.
Hmm.
Bad thing is it does in some way, but you don't have any oversight over it anymore, right? I mean, I prefer to do segments myself and understand what I'm doing. And on the other hand, I'm also an asshole because I don't trust any of these churn predictions that any of the tools give you, right? Because
Yeah.
that is especially something you can't put a general churn model on everything, right? For example, we talked about FreeNow already. In the FreeNow case, you might have people that if they are not coming back to the app after 4 weeks, they are lost and churned and not even dormant. And there might be other people like the grandma who's going to Forteventura twice a year, who comes into the app twice a year consistently for 10 years, no issue at all, right? And that's something where that doesn't work. And I mean, again, the grandma then would get vouchers like shit again, which we don't want. So that's something where I'd rather have my thumb on that and be able to understand that myself and shape it in the way it's best for my company, which, sorry to say, most of the tools can't do and won't do because it's not their focus.
And what happens if you, let's say you walk into a team and that's the project, right? Like, let's say you find a CRM team um, that hasn't defined their strategy. They have a very strong tool. One other issue that I always find similar to what you said is that they usually have these tools where they can pipe the data and make the data more contextual in the business sense as well, but they have failed to integrate these CRM tools with like sort of data platforms as well. Let's say if you walk into a team like that, right? Like, what are the kind of questions and what are the kind of things that you start with? And then you say, okay, this is how, similar to your one person job, right? Like, how do you, someone says, okay, go. What are the things that you would want to get done in the first 3 months?
I mean, the first thing I would always do is take the team away from their tools in a room where they probably also don't have computers and ask stupid questions, right? And I think the most important question is really, why do you do this? So, and this goes down a bit deeper because in the end, it's like, what are the kind of information you want to look at every day? What is the target you have every day? Do you really understand whether you fulfill this target? Do you even know what the target is? Really go into this direction, trying to get into this North Star KPI thing for them, right? What are our use cases? And then making this clear, the other side would be quite quickly to talk to their stakeholders and also understand what do the stakeholders accept from them, right? Because sometimes you might have a stakeholder that doesn't even understand what CRM is, or it's like, oh yeah, you send emails, great, done, go on with that, and that's it. I mean, there might be people that don't even get what they're doing, and I think this also needs to be improved a lot. And based on this, you arrive at the use cases that the team really needs to fulfill. And then, I mean, then it's standard project management, right? Try to understand what's a low hanging fruit, get this done properly first. What's the way higher, far hanging fruit? That's maybe something we have to do later. And I mean, in the end, this will always involve, oh, we have to get more data power, more people that can really work with the tools to focus on that. Because that's the other issue. There might be quite often a tool like Braze, no one's owning it. So the tool is there, the data is doing something with it, tech is doing something with it, the CRM team is doing something with it, but no one really knows who's the owner of this tool and who's like the person that should talk to Braze or ask Braze questions or something like this. I think that's also always a quite important thing. It's also difficult because it's hard to find someone who feels responsible for these kind of things.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's also like this whole, very often with CRM tools, I think also teams are built around operational efficiency. So you would very often find teams who are really good at using the tool and are, or can utilize everything that the tool has to offer from an operational perspective. But then they don't have this strategic depth as to, how do you, exactly what you said, right? Like, I think I would bet that most CRM teams have not spent a workshop day with the stakeholders or the data
Yeah,
teams, understanding how are they looking at the data
and
and
why
stuff, right?
not? I mean, it's like you can't work in your silo. That will never be beneficial for anyone.
Yeah, and I think like when it comes to like to services like FreeNow, one thing that I have seen is, okay, maybe you get these conversion rates, and let's say you've also understood your voucher logic, right? You've understood the business context. It's still relatively easier for CRM teams to prove their ROI because they can very often run an A/B test and they know the increase in conversions and the revenue, etc. I have worked with a lot of subscription apps, and that's where things also get a bit
Yeah.
muddier, right? Because then you have retention, calculating ROI on retention, and I know you mentioned briefly last time that you have a framework around like how do you walk you know clients through measuring customer LTV. So how would you tackle that as a topic, right? Because, and I can give you my view later on how I do it wrongly probably right now, but yeah, how would you go around that? Like, how do you put an ROI value against retention and for subscription
No,
apps.
I think the most important thing is really to understand how much money do your subscribers or your customers actually make for you, right? I mean, you will never be able to understand a campaign or retention measure after the first week or after the first 4 weeks because there's a long tail, and especially even more when you have subscription apps. Unless you have someone who pays for annual fee, then it's quite often already good, right? That would be the perfect case. The important thing I always try to ask people and make them understand is what actually their customer lifetime value is. And that's really hard to answer, right? Because it's a crystal ball. You don't know how long people are staying. What you can do is something like what I like to do a lot is really to predict CLV based on behavior. And that's also what I think is quite good for subscription apps because you can't look at sales, right? FreeNow, easy, 5 weeks, probably 5 taxi trips, no problem. You see how much are people spending. On the other hand, you can also build a measure like spending for anything that is happening behaviorally on your platform. Let's say video streaming. On video streaming, you can look at, hey, how often do people come into the platform? How many minutes do they view? How often do they come back? If you now hear these words, I'm a big fan of recency frequency monitoring models, right? That's the thing where you can really understand stuff quite easily. And that's also something I already built on, like, I think 3 or 4 different companies all the time again, because it's a model that everyone understands. It's very easy to explain, and it makes people also understand, oh, yeah, that's right. The customer that comes into my app twice in 7 days stays for 5 minutes. And the last time he was there in the 7 days was on the second day is probably not as good as the customer who's there every day, well, besides Sundays, so 6 times, and was here yesterday and usually spends half an hour on my platform. So these people are probably more invested, or they want to watch all your videos immediately. It might also be the case, but that's another story. And out of these things, you can very easily build an RFM model to predict the customer lifetime value. And again, what I also wouldn't do is to predict the customer lifetime value fully. So this customer will make you 3,000 euros. No, because you don't know. What you can do is to build a framework based on these clusters you get out of the recency frequency monetary system and say, this is the amount of money this group will probably make after 3 months. This is the amount of money this group will probably make after 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And at FreeNow, that was quite interesting because we also had this. You don't have real numbers, right? For everyone, you have like a bucket. You have a bucket of people that pay nothing at all, that pay maybe 10 euros in the next 9 months, that pay 100, 200, maybe 1,000. But this is like the range, right? High, low, mid, none. And what would you say, which of these buckets was the most important one for us? And with which bucket did we save or make the most money in the end?
The mid one, right? Because those are probably the ones that you can move to the next frame.
True, that's what everyone says, but we talked about this voucher shit. We were able to understand who the voucher hunters were with this because this is CLV. So CLV is like the cost of acquisition minus the revenue. And everyone who was in the zero bucket was quite obviously someone we shouldn't treat anymore because these guys are voucher hunters and they just want to do rides when it's for free for them and costs us money. So really eliminating this group, yeah, I think was the best thing we ever did because that really leveled this up. And then obviously, yeah, sure, the mid one is easy to move to the next one. So moving from one group to the next was really also quite an important thing. But the most important thing was really to understand who are the ones we should get out of the system. And that was also quite hard to make people understand, right? Because in the end, you're like, I have 10 million active customers. I will now reduce this to 5 because the 5 are the important ones. Yeah, but how do we explain this to the shareholders?
Yeah, exactly.
By making them more money. Let's just do it. Or maybe don't tell them, but this is the way we have to do it.
I see. Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, right? Like one pushback that I always get on these kind of initiatives, especially where you ask leadership or you propose that you're going to stop messaging a large part of your user base that they have already paid to acquire, it never goes well, right? It's like, why we have this 5 million users in our database, why are we not sending them anything? And it's a very hard argument
Yeah.
to make.
Yeah, but I mean, if you have the numbers and you can show them this group, we sent them something twice last month, and 2 times we made 1 negative euro on each of them. I mean, that should be something when management teams see this and they still don't trust this, then maybe you should look for another company because they might fire you at some point anyways because the money is gone. That's like, yeah.
And I really like that, by the way. Like the RFM model, it's like this long-standing model that has proved the test of time, and it actually is still one of the most. I think it's one of the most used and stable
Yeah.
frameworks when it comes to segmentation.
And fun fact, ChatGPT can code it for you completely nowadays, and it is very, very fast.
Oh, really? How do you do that, by the way?
I mean, the thing is, if you do these kinds of things in ChatGPT, you still have to clean the data, right? I mean, you still have to understand these are your three measures, but the whole clustering, elbow curve, understanding how many clusters you have, and then assigning values to this works. I mean, prepare the
Wow.
data and all the data science shit ChatGPT can do for you, or Julius AI or whatever can do quite well.
This is awesome, by the way. I remember in my masters, I also took like marketing analytics, was one of my key topics. And I remember we used to do this clustering on this tool called
Yeah.
SPSS. Oh man. And this K means clustering, and then figuring out how many clusters you need, etc. And I used to bang my head every time I had to do this. Also, it took so long to run these things, and sometimes your computer would give away in the middle of the analysis. And I really think that's where, by the way, like this whole, this new AI revolution has made it super easy. Even if you're a team with like little to no investment, you could now have a very strong method of doing this, right? Do you see any cool ways, by the way, like that companies have used? I'm deviating a little bit, but I like, how do teams have been using it, or how do you use AI in these kind of modeling exercises?
I mean, in the end, I'm doing almost everything with ChatGPT now just to understand whether I didn't look at everything, right? Whether there might be another way
Mm.
to do it. The really nice thing is you can test many different methods very, very quickly. And it's also quite easy to prepare data, right? I mean, you can quite often just dump unstructured data in there and tell ChatGPT, hey, I want this, 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 this. Please give this to me. Maybe you still have to explain the data a bit more, but it's like in the end, I feel you always have a data scientist or a data analyst at hand. Not the best one, not the smartest one, not the one that thinks 10 steps ahead, but someone who can do the work. That makes it way easier and way better. And I mean, when we look at the RFM stuff and the CRV prediction, this enables me to test different ideas or different combinations of parameters very, very quickly. And that's just awesome, right? And I mean, especially this, how many clusters, ChatGPT also explains it to you, right? And I mean, it's always quite easy to ask, hey, what did you do in this step? Why did you do this? Explain it in layman's terms. That makes things, yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
if you look even further, I mean, my favorite thing is stuff like manual data input, which you might have quite often in not CRM directly, but more if you go in the sales direction. Hey, put something like ChatGPT on it, give it the data set, and find all the mistakes.
100%.
Something that wouldn't have worked that fast anywhere else.
Seriously, that's incredible. I've also used a little bit on the data sets, but I always find it very hard because sometimes you need a enterprise model before they leak like any revenue data.
Yeah,
So it's also like tricky in data privacy in some cases. But yeah, I've always been keen to use this.
that's a good point. Don't use ChatGPT if you don't have a version that's data privacy locked, right? It needs to be your own
Yeah,
team's version and not the free one, because then the data is out there. Then you have to anonymize
yeah.
the data quite carefully, and I think that's yeah. So I'm quite happily paying the highest price you can pay as a non-company person for ChatGPT because this works.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like what that has a positive ROI.
It has a massive positive ROI. I think I paid 30 euros a month, and I probably have a return invest like factor 100 or something like that on that, at least.
Yeah. Um, cool. And I think like let's say now you have an RFM model and you are, as a CRM team, what you're saying is like, okay, to build a lifetime value framework, what you are then geared towards is how do I move people into buckets,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
then that becomes your sort of driving metric, or
exactly,
that becomes your goal.
exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, go for it.
Call it value segments or something like this. Buckets is always funny, but
Mm,
it's like you have to get people from the value segment low to the value segment mid by telling them, hey, use this voucher, or this might be interesting to you. I mean, what we also did at FreeNow was like, we know you are traveling quite often from A to B, and why don't you use this? And there's a nicer car for that. These kind of things, right?
And I love this because also if you look at like CRM teams in, by the way, like CRM has gone through a lot of changes in the last few years, and that one big change has been also, org structures, right? Like te- teams and people don't know how yet, because CRM is getting very wide. So it's also very difficult for teams to say, okay, what is a good org structure? And very common, they have been just adopting what has been done before, which is top of funnel, bottom of funnel, and then you have these issues, which is like one team is optimizing for conversion rates, one team is just focused on the top of funnel, and then they're doing all these black hat things to drive their own metrics, but it doesn't work as a system. And this, with these value systems, you probably have a better chance of doing that, right? Perfect.
Nice.
I know we are just over time. One last question is, any thoughts on like the future of data, and when you are working with clients, what are you seeing more of now versus what you were seeing before, and what are some things at top of mind
Yeah.
for you
So
that is coming up?
I think there is a shift from a strong focus on acquisition to a higher focus on retention, right? Because just to the whole third party cookie consent, first party data stuff, because CRM data is usually your data. And it's quite easy to look at this, right? Even if you don't have communication consent with everyone, you can still use all the data from all the customers to actually build segments, right? So I think that's something where I see there will be a higher focus. There needs to be a higher focus on this because it will become more shotgunny to get people into the
Mm,
system, and then really, in the end, the real conversion rate will be delayed a bit further down the funnel to when people are locked in or when people are interested in
mm,
in the product already. I think that's something I see quite often. Quite often, people don't want to see this either, and don't want to open their eyes in this direction. But I think this is the way it has to happen, right? Because you can only really work with customers if the data is yours and if you're allowed to do that. And on the other hand, I mean, we always have to say the rise of Gen AI, right? The rise of Gen AI is making things a lot easier already. And I also think no one in CRM has to be afraid of that, right? I mean, no AI will steal your job. Someone who knows how to use the AI will steal your job. I think that's the thing. And I think that's also quite important to people shouldn't be afraid of that. People should be able to use this more to really see the benefits and be open to, yeah, hey, take this to go home 1 hour earlier. Why would you do stuff manually? That's bullshit. Like, I mean, let
yeah.
the machines do that.
Is there any data, like what do you recommend folks in marketing, especially like maybe not the leadership, but maybe teams which are operationally working on CRM and marketing? What kind of data literacy do they need? Do you have any good resources they should check out and do this?
Yeah, I mean, I can advertise a bit because I'm
Okay.
doing this other podcast, Marketing Measurement Matters, with the people from Exatriba, now Funnel. And I think
Okay.
these kind of things are interesting, right? To just listen to people, how other podcasts like yours, you need to listen to the things, how other people do this. And you need to understand this. And then you need to also be interested in that, look at it a bit more, because it's always good to broaden your horizon a bit. On data literacy, I mean, seriously, if you ask me, everyone should be able to use a database. And I know this is a big step and this sounds scary to be able to use SQL or something like this. But dude, seriously, ChatGPT is there to help you. I mean, and that's something I always said, right? My job is something also 10, 20 years ago. All the knowledge, all the stuff you need to learn is on the internet, right? You don't even need to study for that. But I think it's quite important to really be able to manipulate, understand, and wrangle data yourself. And I think the only way to do this is really SQL. Yes, self-service dashboards are great, but it's much easier to just look at the raw data. Well, not the raw data, maybe the aggregated data, someone prepared for you in a data mart, but yeah, anything SQL-wise will speed you up a lot.
Yeah, I just the last note, by the way. There's this book called High Output Management by Andy Grove, and I think like one thing he says there is that I absolutely love, that he used to make teams write these project description pages, which were documents which were 3-5 pages long. And when he was asked like, Isn't this bullshit? Like people can just present and stuff, like make a presentation instead. Why waste time? And he's like, this is not for me, this
It's
is
for them.
for
It's
them,
for
so
them.
that,
They have
yeah,
to understand.
exactly.
They have to sit down, think about it, put it in their own words, because the only way you can do this is putting it in your own words, right? It's funny
Yeah.
because every time I learn for a test, what I always did was write down the stuff I wanted to learn down in my own words, and then it's in there, and then you understand it. That's I still do this. I still write papers for every project. Not papers, but at least one pages.
Yeah, 100%. Not ChatGPT stuff.
No.
Well, thanks, Tim, for being here. I
Yeah, thank
absolutely
you.
loved this conversation. Yeah, I hope you all. Any last parting words before we switch off?
No, I think I can just reiterate, try to use Gen AI and everything that's out there as much as possible, and don't do stuff yourself which annoys you.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you. Have a nice weekend.